Hey, welcome back to our study this week, and we're looking at Genesis 23. This study is called Greeting Them from Afar, and today we're doing a section called The Passing of an Example, which is Genesis 23, 1 through 2. So as we start looking at this passage, we're going to be greeted with a very abrupt description of the death of Sarah. We don't really have any lead-in by our author Moses. He just jumps right in. There's no fanfare, no explanation of how she died or why she died. We're just told that Sarah's gone. As I said, Sarah greeted the full promises of God from afar. She sure saw the promises being fulfilled, but she did not witness the fullness of the promises. Sarah dies in the promised land, but her family still doesn't own any land there. So the promise that Abraham's descendants would own this land, that they would own the land of Canaan, nothing really has moved on that, except for that's kind of the land that they're traveling back and forth through. So the land that their descendants will possess is still unowned by them. Moses mentions that she dies at Kiriath-arba, which was the old Hittite name for what would be called Hebron in the Hebrew. That means that somewhere since the last story of Abraham, he's moved back to where he used to live, near the oaks of Mamre. It was there that he built an altar to the Lord, and now Sarah has breathed her last at the same place. Hebron would be a place that would have a long history for Sarah's descendants. Hebron would be one of the cities that Joshua devotes to destruction. He devotes Kiriath-arba to destruction. Some of the Anakim, or the family of giants, according to Joshua, lived in Hebron. That's where there was some giant people living there. So that was a hard take, because he had to defeat these giant people. After the conquest of the city was given to Caleb. Remember, he was one of the spies, along with Joshua, that went in and spied out the promised land before the people went into it. And he was one of the ones that was faithful. And so Caleb was given that city. He was given the city of Hebron and his descendants. So, in the nation of Israel, Hebron was a city of refuge for those that had committed manslaughter. It was one of those cities that you could run to if you accidentally killed someone. You could go there so that the family wouldn't avenge their death. So you could go there. Samson was at Hebron. He would take the gates of the city of Gaza, which was owned by the Philistines. Remember, he ripped the gates off the city and he carried them all the way to Hebron, where he displayed them on the hill just outside the city. And it was at Hebron that God told David to reign over Judah before he reigned over the united nation of Israel. So he reigned in Hebron first before he reigned in Jerusalem. So it's a long history of Sarah's descendants in Hebron, in that city. So we're told that Sarah was 127 years old when she died. Now, we're never told the impact of Sarah's death on Abraham. We don't know exactly what it did to him. They were probably married for more than likely over 100 years. And had been on this adventure in the land of Canaan for 60 years. So they've been together for a long time, went through a lot of stuff together. Sarah got to see her promised child grow, become a man. Isaac was probably either 36 or 37 years old when she died. And Sarah is given the honor of being the only woman whose death and age at death are recorded in Scripture. No other woman has that. She is a special chosen woman. And she was given a special honor. No other woman has that. Not even Mary, the mother of Jesus. So, but as we think about Sarah, this isn't the last time that Sarah's mentioned in Scripture here. We looked before at the book of Galatians, saw her mentioned there too. There are two places in Scripture where Sarah is given as an example to follow. There is no other woman in the Bible who God calls his people to emulate, really. You don't see that where God specifically says, here's an example. This woman is an example to follow. So she is definitely a special woman in the Bible. Not even Mary, even though Mary has been venerated in many churches over the last 2,000 years. It's Sarah who is the one who is pointed as the example, the one who you are to follow, especially as women are to follow. Let me give you some examples here. If you go to Isaiah 51, this is what it says. Listen to me, you who pursue righteousness, you who seek the Lord, look to the rock from which you were hewn, and to the quarry from which you were dug. Look to Abraham, your father, and to Sarah, who bore you, for he was but one when I called him, that I might bless him and multiply him. So God says to those that are seeking him, seeking his righteousness, look to Abraham and Sarah as an example of what that means. So if you're seeking after God, look to the quarry from which you were taken. The quarry is Abraham and Sarah. You're coming out of their lineage. If you're trying to follow God, seeking God, trying to seek his righteousness, then what you're doing is following after the footsteps of Abraham and Sarah. So they're the example. Sarah's one of the examples there. Go to 1 Peter chapter 3. Peter points Christian wives to Sarah. That's what he does. He says she is the example of what it means to be a gorgeous woman, not outwardly, but inwardly. Here's what he says. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands. Sarah submitted herself to Abraham, even though Abraham did some fairly stupid things. I mean, let's be honest. He wasn't always thinking the best. She had her moments herself. She wasn't perfect. But overall, she had a gentle and quiet spirit, which God finds very precious. How was she able to be submissive, even when her husband did some bonehead things sometimes? Well, because Sarah did what was good and did not fear anything frightening. That's what Peter says. She was an example to women and to all people who seek the Lord in faith. You may not understand what's going on. You may not like what's going on. But you're willing to submit yourself. And that's what people of faith do. Some of you might have heard of a woman named Ruth Bryan. She died in 1860. Her correspondence and diary have been published and really give you insight into her inner thoughts and struggles of a Christian seeking to follow God. Let me read to you what a biographer wrote of her, which really made me think of Sarah. This is another woman who is an example to other women specifically, but also to people of faith as well. Here's what the biographer said of her. It will be perceived she was one of the Lord's favored children, often privileged to walk in his sunshine and to dwell under his shadow. But be it remembered that the beauty of her character was all of grace. Without its wonder-working power, she would have been but a cumberer of the ground, a stone in nature's quarry. But the Lord, in his divine sovereignty and matchless love, took her from thence to cleanse her and clothe and consecrate her for himself. And under the hand of the great refiner, she was prepared and adorned to take her place among the living stones in his heavenly temple. What a great way to be described by someone who came after you. That you were, chosen by God, that you were prepared, adorned to take your place amongst the living stones, amongst God's temple. And what a great way to be remembered. What an example. That's only used of words that are described of an example. But what does he go to? He says it was only by grace that she was that way. And it's the same thing for Sarah and Abraham, for that matter. They were both only examples because of the grace of God. So here in the death of Sarah, you have the death of an example of one who should be emulated. Not the faults, not the scheming part, but the rest of her life, her willing to submit to Abraham and to follow him and to be a support to him and to trust in the promises of God by faith. She had Isaac. And we need to remember that and to remember Sarah. So spend some time this week, if you get a chance, looking at Sarah's story, go a little bit deeper. Think about her as an example. Think about the fact that she is given as the example by other writers in the Old and New Testament, and none of the other women were. So that's important, I think. That's very important. Not that the other women aren't examples, but they're not called out. They're not singled out by the other writers of Scripture. So I think that's an important piece to think about when we're thinking about, who we ought to be following and who we should be emulating. Who is that great cloud of witnesses that we ought to be following after? So think about that this week, and come back next time and we'll look at Abraham and what happens right after the death of Sarah.